Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio. Talking to Tim Suttle. His book is The Public Jesus, and he's trying to raise the conversation about what's the role of faith and religion and Christianity specifically in public life. Tim, I don't know if you heard the earlier part of the show, but I was mentioning how in public conversations, so often we see the role of Catholicism playing a major part. The Supreme Court, a lot of judges. The role of Catholic bishops. One of our two presidential vice presidents are going to be, they're both Catholic, so they're going to be.
Right.
So there's this kind of Catholicism vibe that happens in public life, and for a lot of people, and I know you're in Olathe, Kansas, and I'm in Minneapolis, and there's a lot of people whose background is Catholicism, right? And and they're many people feel a bit torn about their relationship with Catholicism and the church and so on. And then there's a whole other group of people whose influence is evangelicalism, right? So, and that might be broad evangelicalism that would include Southern Baptists or, kind of your standard free churches or, your denominational churches that have an evangelical bent to them and so on. And aren't we really, isn't what is happening is that there's like these aren't they just as cultural or as do whatever you have to do to keep your crowd in sway and in power as the political side? Like I know it's easy to critique the political thing. Do you think there's also a really healthy critique that your book wants to raise, or the ideas that are in your book are going to raise for people about the role of religion as a dominating narrative for people?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm in Kansas, where our Governor Brownback, is converted to Catholicism, and yet although he goes to Topeka Bible Church,
he does.
Very open about his involvement in the Doug Coe stuff and the family, National Prayer Breakfast, all those guys. So he wears his religion on his shirt sleeve, and. I can't help feeling as a Kansan, we had our primary elections last week, and that we had 22 moderates in state legislatures, Senate and House, who were challenged by far-right American for Prosperity and Chamber of Commerce supported candidates. 17 of the 22 moderates went down.
Really?
And so now we have the most dangerous of all situations, which is that through political action or influence or whatever, we are silencing all voices of dissent in Arkansas. And so, it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be interesting 2 years to watch, because the conservatives have complete control, and there's no reason for even an alternative or minority view to be considered. Now they're going to run. What impresses me about the Catholic Church is that somehow over time they've figured out a way to be a really big tent and still belong to one another. And so you have the Catholic left, albeit a shrinking political entity, but it's always been there, and probably even more so up where you are than where I am. But now where I am, much of the growing Catholicism is more of an evangelical stripe. It seems that way. Catholics have figured out how to keep them all together without, usually at least, killing one another or silencing the voices of dissent. That's a pretty impressive feat. My biggest concern is that they won't be able to do it. And some of the stuff that's been in the news about the Catholic nuns and they want to speak about poverty, and their church wants them to speak about abortion, and they don't want to speak about that, or whatever. I think one of the things I talk about in the book is that ideologies that we hold to are just handlebars for us to try to deal with reality. And at any given time, I am so wrong about much of what I think, politically, religiously, or otherwise. And so we hold on to these monikers like Republican or Democrat as though they're real. They're not real. It's just a handlebar to try to help me absorb reality without going crazy. and without always feeling so vulnerable that I don't know how to speak and be involved in public folk life.
Well, and my non-religious...
And what ends up happening... Go ahead.
I was going to say my non-religious friends will say the same thing about Christianity, right? They say, the thing that's funny about you Christians is you talk about your faith as if it's an actual thing, like that it should shape you and form you, and it is the guiding principle of your life. And you don't acknowledge that all of that is just as cultural. So if we could get to some greater humanity and not have to go through the lens of your religious language and your religious commitments, they feel that gets just as much in the way of a human collective togetherness as politics does. Do you think so?
I think that falls prey to my initial critique. I mean, the way they're talking, I would agree with that assessment, and I would say that if your faith is a guiding principle, then the game's already lost.
Oh, interesting.
It's not a guiding. That means it's religion. It's private. It's between you and God, and it's just sort of my whatever ethos. That's not Christianity, at least not the way I've come to understand it. Christianity is not a belief system. It is a new way to be a human being, and it is not arbitrary, but it is also not fully prescribed. In other words, it's not like we just do repetitions of everything Jesus did. It's brand new expressions of a life lived toward the future of God, which is just a life lived in hope. And so I think the guiding principle, politicians love to do this. They basically have to tick the religion box, right? So yeah, I have some ethos. And for the Christian, we should say, nah, we don't care about that. I don't need to hear your testimony or whether you're Presbyterian or whatever. I want to know what kind of human being you are. And what do you think is the nature of ultimate reality? What's going on here? Is this a power game for you? Do you have just an agenda that you'd like to accomplish? Or are you trying to steward something sacred to you? And that's not just a power game, but it's more like, how are we going to organize so that everybody has enough? The Christian narrative, it gets pulled out, inserted into politics to sprinkle politics with just enough sentimentalized religion to make it palatable, so we can say, okay, that's fine, now let's talk policy. And I think religion has, or at least the Christian faith, my faith, has everything to do with policy, because how we organize matters. Mm-hmm. It says something about who we are. For instance,
but doesn't that drive someone then to make public policy based on their religious conviction? Like, how do you keep that from becoming a functional theocracy?
Well, I have an open question in my mind. I've written about this some in the Post. Just the idea of how high can a Christian ascend in public office and still be a Christian? This is one of my problems with even just being a part of a political party. At some point, if you're a part of a political party as a Christian, they are going to ask you to do things you should not be okay with. They're gonna want you to sign up for, take sides on certain policies that you're gonna not want a piece of, and it'll put you at odds with your party. That seems to me inevitable, and so I don't know. I mean, if Christianity is a way of being in the world, then we just kind of encounter life as it comes, try to image God in that situation, bear others' sins, forgive things in real time, and we don't really need to play power games, because our suggestion is that life is not about how to get out of this alive. Life is about how to steward every moment.
A friend of mine had a Facebook post encouraging people to get themselves into voting yesterday, And he had a quote from one of the campaigns of a guy named Tim Tingelstad, who's somebody who's running for the Minnesota Supreme Court here. And this guy's statement, I think, is interesting. This is the political statement of this Tim Tingelstad, who wants to be on the Minnesota Supreme Court. He says, "As God's word has been removed from our public lives, the resulting darkness has led to our present social disorder and political divisions. The correction of these problems will only begin when the light of truth is returned to our land's highest hills, the Supreme Courts." So now here's a guy who doesn't want to be in the political system where you're voted as a politician, but wants to work in the public domain through the court system, and is advocating, look, the word of God gives us what we need for the light of our nation. And like that kind of statement freaks me out, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't, if that were in, Iran or Afghanistan or Pakistan, you'd be freaking out that there's some sort of an Islamic theocracy going on. But people talk like that all the time. So how, I mean, if that's a little much, right? But how then does somebody who's a school teacher or somebody who works in some sort of public way or organizing their neighborhood, like where should someone draw the line of their own faith and how they think things should be religiously in the world? How do they how do they care for that without some great systemic risk of messing up the whole system?
Right. I think the key move in that, or maybe ability for the Christian to be able to do, is to distinguish between the Christian we and the American we.
Okay.
And so a guy who writes the kind of thing you just read to me, which I agree, that scares me. And it doesn't scare me so much as I just feel bad for that guy because he's missing the good part. He's highly invested in a vision of what it means to be a Christian that I think ultimately leads to violence. And for him. And I think if Hal Ross he's one of my heroes. He always says, I represent the Tonto principle in Christian ethics. He's talking about a Lone Ranger in Tonto that one time they're in the Dakotas, surrounded by all these Indians are about to kill him, and the Lone Ranger says, "We're in a bad fix. What do you think we ought to do?" And Tonto looks at him and says, "What do you mean we, white man?" And he says, "This is the movement we need to learn how to make, to distinguish between the Christian we and the American we." And we become highly invested in the Christian we. Now, this is a particular tradition of we.
Yeah, right, because that freaks me out. I'm like, I don't know who, that just seems like a different circle to draw around people. Like, which Christians is he talking about, and which? Right. So anyway, okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
but if we can do that, then we begin to become a little bit less invested in the American we. And I think this is important. Like you said earlier, these things come and go. Nations come and go.
Yeah.
And when attempting to engage in Christian political speech, establishing the Christian we is the most critical task, and I think most people have it backwards.
Well, thanks.
So I would say that guy was writing much more as an American with a Christian agenda than a Christian with a human agenda. I would say it that way.
And you'll chase that out in the book.
Non-nationalistic agenda.
That's Tim Suttle. The book is called Public Jesus, and you can find him over on Pathos. Look up Paperback Theology. Tim, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I appreciate the chance to be on the show.
Right on, buddy. Thanks. Hey, stick around, folks. We're going to be back with Bruce Epperly. We're going to chat with Bruce about his wonderful and crazy views of the world as well. So here's a little...
How long is this break, Doug?
3 minutes.
Okay, I think I can...
Hang tight. Go grab a shower.
Okay.
Thanks again, Tim. We'll be back here with Bruce Epperly here after the break.
Thanks.